She stepped onto the jet bridge like any other traveler, her pace steady but unhurried. The terminal behind her buzzed with the chaos of modern life, children whining for snacks, businessmen barking into phones, couples rushing to make last calls. She blended seamlessly into the blur, carrying nothing more than a weathered canvas backpack slung over one shoulder. To the gate agent, she was simply passenger 14A, tickets scanned, boarding pass torn neatly in half. To everyone else she was invisible, a figure among many. Her clothes were plain dark jeans, a light jacket, hair pulled into a no-nonsense knot. Not the kind of woman who drew stares. That was deliberate. She had perfected anonymity. Years ago she had been accustomed to scrutiny, the hard gaze of instructors, the suspicious eyes of commanders, the fleeting glances of fellow pilots who whispered her call sign like a half-myth. But that was another life, one she buried deep beneath layers of ordinary. The air inside the cabin was warm, tinged with the faint scent of recycled air and industrial carpet. People shuffled down the narrow aisle, jostling for space in overhead bins. She moved gracefully, quietly, letting the tide of humanity flow around her. Seat 14A was waiting. By the window middle of the plane, not too conspicuous, not too isolated. She slid into it without fuss, placing her backpack carefully beneath the seat ahead. Her movements were efficient, economical, habits born from years when hesitation meant death. From the outside, no one could guess what those hands had once done. They looked ordinary now, resting in her lap, fingers interlaced loosely. But those same hands had gripped a throttle, traced missile lock switches, adjusted HUD displays under crushing G-forces. They had steadied her through dogfights, signed after-action reports written in terse language that concealed unspeakable truths. And yet here they were, folded calmly like any other traveler settling in for a 2-hour flight. Around her, the cabin filled with familiar distractions. A businessman in a tailored suit settled into 14B, immediately pulling out his phone, already composing emails. Across the aisle, a young mother coaxed her toddler into the seat with promises of snacks. The flight attendants moved briskly, their practiced smiles masking fatigue. To all of them, she was just another woman on her way to Washington, and that was exactly how she wanted it. She turned her gaze to the oval window, watching ground crews load luggage, watching the wide-bodied jets lumber into position. It reminded her of nights long ago, standing on foreign tarmacs, the air heavy with jet fuel and desert sand. Back then, each engine roar wasn't routine. It was survival, destiny, and fear all wrapped into one. Tonight, though, she watched quietly, as if observing someone else's world. She had learned to live in silence, to disappear into crowds. The name she once carried was buried so deeply she almost believed it had belonged to someone else. The woman called Valkyrie, the one who had danced with death above hostile skis, who had outmaneuvered enemies that outnumbered her 6-1, who had brought squadrons home when odds were stacked against survival, was gone. Now there was only this, a middle-aged traveler, quiet, alone, unnoticed. But the past has a way of refusing burial. It waits, patient, hidden in echoes. Sometimes all it takes is a single word, spoken aloud, to shake the earth and tear down the walls carefully built over years of silence. And today, that word was coming. For now, though, she leaned back as the plane's engines began their low rumble. The businessman beside her sighed, annoyed by the delay. The toddler giggled at the crackle of the intercom. Passengers were absorbed in their own small worlds, believing nothing extraordinary lay among them. They had no idea. Outside, streaks of late sunlight burned across the horizon. The runway stretched ahead, endless, promising nothing more than a routine flight. Yet fate had slipped aboard with her. The sky that had once been her battlefield was waiting. And soon, whether she wanted it or not, everyone on this plane would know exactly who she was. She wasn't ready. But legends never are. The engines rumbled to life, a low vibration that hummed through the cabin. Most passengers barely noticed, too consumed by their screens, snacks, or idle chatter. But she noticed. She always did. The sound carried a rhythm familiar to her bones, the deep, steady growl of turbines preparing to unleash power. It reminded her of nights crouched under desert stars, listening as Allied jets throttled up, their afterburners screaming into the black. Tonight, though, it was only a commercial airliner taxiing lazily toward the runway. Just routine. At least that's what everyone believed. Her gaze remained fixed out the small oval window. The floodlights of Denver's runways glowed like constellations on the ground, guiding pilots through a careful ballet of departures and landings. To most, the sight was ordinary. To her, it was memory. She could almost see ghosts of the past, her fighter waiting in the darkness, crews double-checking ordnance, the cold metal ladder under her gloves as she climbed into the cockpit. Each detail returned unbidden, precise, as though time itself hadn't dulled her senses. The man beside her, the businessman in 14B, was already complaining. Another delay. These airlines are never on time, he muttered, tapping at his phone with irritation. She gave him a polite nod, a thin smile. She didn't tell him that waiting was once her specialty, that patience in the skis she once owned could mean the difference between life and sudden oblivion. Civilians didn't need to know those truths. They lived in comfortable illusions where late meetings were tragedies, not flares of incoming fire. The plane rolled forward, taxiing toward the main runway. She felt the subtle shift as the pilot braked, turned, then waited for clearance. Her body responded instinctively, muscles tightening as though preparing for a combat launch. Old reflexes never left. Even here in this sanitized civilian flight, her pulse ticked faster, her mind calculating speed, lift, angle. She caught herself gripping the armrest and forced her fingers to relax. She wanted quiet. That was why she traveled alone in silence, blending into the fabric of ordinary life. She didn't wear medals, didn't display insignia, didn't reveal the name that once carried across radios in war zones. To the world, she was no one. But deep down, she knew the truth. Her past was not forgotten. It was simply sleeping. The intercom crackled. The captain's voice carried through the speakers, calm and routine at first. "Ladies, and we'll be taking off shortly. Expected arrival in Washington is 2 hours, 20 minutes. Weather is clear." His tone was professional, detached, the same cadence all airline passengers had heard countless times. But then something shifted. He hesitated, words catching. Her heart skipped. She knew that kind of pause. In her world, pauses mattered. A pause on the radio could mean jammed frequencies, could mean death, could mean the difference between rescue and silence. And now that same pause spread unease across her chest. The businessman didn't notice. The toddler, too, rose up, squealed at the sound of the engine spooling higher. But she heard it. The pause. The inhale before something different, something deliberate. The captain spoke again, his voice carrying more weight this time. "And we have a very special passenger aboard today." Her pulse thudded in her ears. No, not here, not now. Around her, passengers perked up, curious. People lifted their heads, removed earbuds, stilled their chatter. They were expecting a celebrity, maybe a sports figure, someone to brag about seeing. She pressed back into her seat, jaw tightening, willing herself to become invisible. The captain continued, carefully. "It's rare we get someone whose history is known by every pilot who's ever flown combat in the last 2 decades. Tonight, one of those legends is sitting among you." The businessman blinked, muttering, "A general or something." Others leaned closer, whispers rippling through the cabin. She closed her eyes. This wasn't happening. She had buried that life. She had sworn no one on a civilian flight would ever speak that name again. And then, like a thunderclap breaking calm skies, he said it. Her call sign, Valkyrie. The word detonated inside her chest. Every nerve lit up. Every memory surged. Engines screaming, radios barking, tracers slicing the night. Faces of wingmen long gone. Her hands twitched, remembering the feel of the throttle. She hadn't heard that name aloud in years. And now it hung in the cabin air, undeniable, unshakable. Passengers turned, scanning rows. Eyes fell on her. Some in curiosity, others in awe. Whispers spread like wildfire, "Valkyrie, here." She kept her face calm, mask unbroken, though inside her heart thundered. She wasn't ready, but legends never are. The cabin fell into a stunned silence. Whispers filled the rows like a gentle tide washing over the passengers. Valkyrie. The name alone carried weight, though no one aboard could fully grasp it. For some, it was a mystery. For her, it was every memory she had tried to lock away, the adrenaline, the danger, the missions that had defined her life. Her pulse raced, and she forced herself to breathe, slow and even. She could feel the eyes now fixed on her, curious, expectant, awestruck. She had hoped to remain invisible, yet the universe had other plans. The teenager a few rows ahead leaned forward, eyes wide, whispering to his mother, "Mom, isn't she?" The woman shook her head, confused, but the boy didn't relent. His fascination mirrored that of dozens of others. They didn't know her story, couldn't know the nights spent threading planes through hostile skies, calculating trajectories where a single miscalculation meant death. Yet the aura was unmistakable, the sense that someone remarkable was seated quietly among them, blending into ordinariness with impossible skill. Her thoughts wandered, unwillingly, back to her last mission in Kandahar. She could still feel the G-force pressing her against the seat, hear the chatter of squadron members on encrypted frequencies, the way the desert night opened like a canyon beneath her wings. 6 enemy fighters had come for them, yet she had maneuvered, calculated, and survived when even her most experienced comrades had faltered. That mission had earned her the call sign, the reputation, the respect of every pilot who had flown in her formation. And now it had followed her here, into the calm of a commercial airliner. The businessman beside her had finally caught up. He leaned in, voice hushed, eyes wide behind thick glasses. "Wait, your Valkyrie, the Valkyrie." She shook her head slightly, lips pressed into a thin line, giving nothing away. Silence, she reminded herself, was the most powerful defense. No one could measure her here in this mundane cabin, surrounded by the unaware. And yet, as she caught herself, she realized something had shifted. The world was beginning to notice, even if they didn't fully understand what they were seeing. Passengers' whispers grew louder, blending with the hum of the engines. Phones were raised discreetly, some surreptitiously recording. She saw it. Fascination, awe, a quiet reverence. And there was fear too, faint but undeniable, a recognition that some lives touched others in ways ordinary people could never fathom. A woman in the row ahead clutched her purse tightly. A man with a coffee cup froze mid-sip. Even the flight attendants, moving past in practiced rhythm, glanced briefly toward her, as if feeling the gravity of an invisible weight. Outside the cabin, far above, the sky seemed to respond. The afternoon sunlight streaked across the tarmac in long golden lines, highlighting the wings of planes lined up for departure. In that light, she felt a pull, the past tugging her forward, reminding her that legends, no matter how deeply buried, cannot remain hidden forever. Valkyrie had been a shadow for years, but shadows have a way of stepping into the light. Her fingers tightened around the armrest, the subtle tension betraying a readiness she hadn't intended to reveal. This wasn't just recognition. Somewhere out there, pilots were hearing her name. Some were nodding in silence, others sparking into action, remembering the maneuvers, the missions, the sheer precision that had defined her. The radio channels she once occupied, encrypted and classified, were alive with whispers even now. The teenager's voice cracked again. "Mom, I think she really is Valkyrie." She glanced at him briefly, letting her eyes meet his. Just a flicker, a shadow of acknowledgement. That was all she could give. A full answer would be dangerous, too revealing. But even the faintest acknowledgement carried weight, enough to ignite a ripple through everyone aboard. She drew in a deep breath and looked out the window down the runway, feeling the vibration of the engines as they idled. This was no longer a simple flight. The moment had shifted. The quiet, ordinary journey was dissolving into something extraordinary, something she couldn't control. The first stirrings of action outside the plane caught her attention. A faint shadow on the horizon. 2 sleek shapes climbing high into the sky, fast, precise. Recognition sparked immediately. She didn't need to see the insignia, they were coming for her. And in that instant, she knew the salute was already somewhere high above, waiting for her acknowledgement. The name had been spoken, the past had arrived, and there would be no turning back. Far above the sprawling tarmac, the sky was a canvas of fading light, streaked with amber and violet. The commercial airliner moved steadily along the runway, unaware of the extraordinary attention it had attracted. On distant air bases, pilots paused mid-pre-flight, radios crackling with unexpected chatter. A single name, whispered over encrypted lines and standard frequencies alike, made the experienced instructors freeze. Valkyrie. Did he just say? A young lieutenant asked, eyes widening, his headset trembling slightly. Yes, replied his commander, voice tight with disbelief. Valkyrie, alive and airborne. The announcement traveled instantly across multiple training channels, bouncing from Langley 2 to classified simulators in Nevada. Every pilot who had ever trained in air combat tactics knew the legend. Her maneuvers, precision, and composure under pressure had been studied meticulously, taught in classrooms, memorized in simulations. She had become a ghost in the annals of modern aviation, face unknown, story partially classified, but the legend of Valkyrie endured. And now, sitting in an unassuming seat on a civilian flight, she had returned to the world that once shaped her. In the cockpit of two F-22 Raptors high above the horizon, a pair of pilots reacted instantly. One reached instinctively for the radio, but the other shook his head, eyes narrowing at the radar screen. They didn't need clearance. They didn't need orders. Recognition was enough. The precision-trained instinct, honed over thousands of hours, was telling them that Valkyrie had boarded a civilian flight, and they were to honor her. The young pilot's hands trembled slightly over the controls. She's really here, Valkyrie. I've read everything, studied every sortie. She survived Kandahar alone. We're going to see her, sir. The commanding pilot's eyes softened. Then we do it. Standard formation. Wing dip. Keep it professional. Let her know the respect she's earned, but let her choose acknowledgement. Back on the plane, passengers remained oblivious, most still focused on their phones or sleeping children. Yet something had shifted, a subtle tension that even the unaware could feel. The hum of engines became a heartbeat, a pulse synchronized with the unseen forces converging overhead. Shadows of military aircraft flickered across the windows, glimpsed only in the peripheral vision of a few observant travelers. The captain's voice cut through the cabin again, calm yet deliberate. Ladies, and you may notice unusual aircraft accompanying us. This is a rare salute requested by members of our armed forces. Please remain seated. Eyes widened, cameras were raised, phones recorded, but she did not look immediately. She let them adjust, let the moment settle. Years of practice had taught her to observe before reacting, to remain steady even when the extraordinary occurred around her. The Raptor pilots aligned perfectly with the airliner, the sun glinting off polished metal wings, engines almost silent at cruising altitude. They dipped in unison, a synchronized motion taught only to the most elite, a gesture reserved for the few who had earned it in combat and sacrifice. The young pilot held his formation, glancing at his wingman. She'll see us. She has to. In the cabin, a teenager at the window squealed, pointing at the winged specters outside. Look, look, oh my gosh, look at that. She leaned toward the window. Time slowed. The ordinary airliner vanished. There was only the sky, the sun-streaked clouds, and two magnificent jets holding perfect formation beside her. Recognition and history collided in the moment. The salute was not for medals or public display. It was for her. For the woman who had carved her legend across skis filled with danger, who had flown through chaos and returned. Her hand pressed to the glass. Her fingers trembled slightly, not from fear but from a familiar rush of adrenaline, control, precision, instinct flooding back in waves. This was a world she knew intimately, even if she had stepped away from it years ago. And now, high above Denver, the world she had once dominated had found her again, ready to honor her without a single word spoken between them. The cabin fell silent. Passengers forgot their phones. Even the toddler paused mid-giggle, mesmerized by the grace and power of machines guided by legends. A hush settled over every row, a reverence that transcended understanding. And through it all, she remained composed, observing, letting the moment wash over her, knowing this acknowledgement was for her alone, and only she could decide how much to accept. The sky had spoken, the pilots had responded, and Valkyrie, though seated quietly among strangers, was once again acknowledged as the force she had always been. Inside the cabin, whispers rippled like a low tide, gradually swelling into waves of astonishment. The passengers who had only moments before been absorbed in mundane routines now froze, staring out windows at the two F-22 Raptors holding perfect formation beside the airliner. The sunlight glinted off their sleek frames, highlighting the precision and power in every angle. No ordinary jets, no ordinary pilots. The air was charged with awe, and even the most skeptical could feel it. Something extraordinary had entered their world. She pressed her hand against the window, fingers tracing a faint outline as if reaching for the pilots themselves. Memories surged, unbidden and relentless. She could see the desert nights, the HUD glowing in the cockpit, tracers lighting up the night sky, the deafening roar of afterburners. The moment she had trained for years, when precision, skill, and courage were tested against impossible odds, was mirrored now in this civilian cabin. The salute was not for them, it was for her. A young boy across the aisle gawked. "Mom, look, that plane's bowing," he whispered urgently. His mother clutched her purse, eyes wide, unable to comprehend what she was seeing. Others fumbled for cameras and phones, some snapping pictures, others simply staring in stunned silence. The businessman beside Valkyrie had frozen completely, jaw slack, eyes glued to the display of synchronized power outside. He had spent the flight worrying about missed meetings, flight delays, and emails. Now all that seemed absurdly trivial. She had anticipated this reaction, though not its intensity. Years of operating in the shadows had trained her to expect anonymity. Recognition was rare and fleeting. But this tangible acknowledgement from the skis, from pilots she had once flown beside or inspired, was a force beyond comprehension. It reached into the cabin, touched every passenger, and even those who did not know her history could feel its gravity. Legends, she realized, could not remain hidden forever. A teenager several rows ahead whispered to his father, voice trembling, That has to be Valkyrie, the one from Kandahar. She survived 6 enemy fighters alone." His father froze, swallowing audibly. Even as disbelief and curiosity collided, a sense of reverence rippled through the cabin. The ordinary flight had become a theater, the passengers unwitting witnesses to a moment they would recount for decades. She let her eyes wander over the crowd, observing reactions without acknowledgement. Silence had power. Letting them feel the moment, letting the awe build organically, was her way of maintaining control. She remembered missions where a single word could betray intent, where revealing yourself too soon could mean death. Now, though the threat was long gone, the instinct remained. Observe, measure, respond. Not for appearances, for truth. The captain's voice cut through, measured and calm. "Ladies, and this salute is requested by members of our armed forces. We honor a living legend aboard our flight today. Please remain seated and witness with respect." Eyes turned to her again. She kept her expression neutral, though her throat tightened. She wasn't seeking applause, fame, or recognition. She had spent years avoiding it, thriving in the quiet anonymity of civilian life. But acknowledgement, she realized, had a different weight. It carried gratitude, respect, and a deep understanding of shared sacrifice. The pilots above did not need her to respond. The salute alone, perfectly executed, spoke volumes. Through the window, the Raptors dipped slightly in perfect unison, a movement she knew instinctively. Her body reacted. Her chest tightened, fingers trembling, adrenaline surging faintly like it had decades ago. The cabin felt electric, charged by history and motion. Children whispered, adults gasped, cameras clicked, but she alone understood the full magnitude. This was more than spectacle. It was remembrance. It was tribute. It was the acknowledgement of countless missions, lives saved, and sacrifices made in silence. A slow, involuntary smile touched her lips, not for the applause, not for the cameras, but for the understanding she felt in the silent communication between her and the pilots above. They had come for her. They had recognized her. And for the first time in years, Valkyrie allowed herself to feel not the burden of the past, but the honor of having it remembered. The hum of the engines filled the cabin, blending with the awestruck murmurs of passengers. Outside, the two F-22 Raptors moved with precision that seemed almost unreal, flanking the airliner in perfect formation. Sunlight danced across polished wings, casting fleeting reflections into the cabin that made the ordinary world shimmer like something out of a dream. To anyone looking, it was a spectacle. To her, it was a familiar rhythm, a choreography of precision, timing, and unspoken understanding. Valkyrie pressed her hand against the window, fingers tracing the metal edges of the Raptor wings as though connecting with the pilots themselves. Her heart pounded, a slow, deliberate beat echoing memories of night sorties over hostile terrain. She could feel the vibrations in her bones, the thrill of speed, the tension of anticipation, the delicate balance between survival and catastrophe. She had lived in this world, breathed it, owned it, and now it had come to her in the quiet of a civilian flight. Passengers craned their necks. Phones were raised hesitantly at first, then confidently, capturing images and video as if they instinctively knew they were witnessing history. A young mother, gripping her child's hand, whispered, "I've never seen anything like this," while a man in a dark suit muttered, "How is this even possible?" The ordinary had been shattered, replaced with awe and wonder. Yet no one realized the full extent of the honor unfolding just meters away from Valkyrie herself. The Raptor pilots maintained flawless formation. Each movement was deliberate, controlled, a silent message of respect that transcended words. They dipped in perfect unison, a maneuver reserved for the highest forms of recognition in military aviation. The salute was not a performance. It was an acknowledgement, a whisper across miles and years, of skill, courage, and sacrifice. Valkyrie's throat tightened as she recognized the gesture, not as a civilian observer, but as a peer, a fellow pilot, a participant in a language only they shared. Memories surged unbidden. The Kandahar desert nights, the radar screens flickering with incoming threats, the crackle of radios as her squadron executed maneuvers with lethal precision. Each flash of motion outside the window recalled a mission, a life saved, a team brought home against impossible odds. The adrenaline, once tempered by years of service, now coursed faintly again. She had not flown in years, yet instinct responded. Heartbeat, pulse, focus. They returned as if no time had passed. Passengers remained captivated. Whispers became audible, gasps punctuated by awe. "Look at the planes," one exclaimed. "They're bowing to someone." Phones recorded, videos streamed live, social media notifications pinged across devices. Yet all of it, even the spectacle, was secondary. Valkyrie alone understood the depth of what was happening. This salute was recognition without explanation, trust without verification, a bond beyond words, forged in skis they alone had navigated. Her gaze shifted to the cockpit. The young F-22 pilot held formation with calm authority, glancing at his wingman. Both were flawless, disciplined, yet unmistakably acknowledging her presence. The coordination, the alignment, the wing dip. It was a language of respect, the kind that could only exist between those who had lived life on the edge of the impossible. She felt the weight of it, the honor of the gesture. A small, involuntary smile crept across her face. It was brief, almost imperceptible, but it carried centuries of shared history, of unspoken recognition, of missions completed and lives preserved. The cabin, oblivious to its full meaning, erupted in applause, cameras flashing. But for her, it was private, intimate, a message that only she and those pilots could truly understand. Time seemed to stretch, suspended in the perfect moment. The Raptors held formation, engines humming, sunlight glinting, every motion deliberate and precise. She breathed deeply, absorbing it, letting it fill the spaces left by years of solitude and silence. Valkyrie had been acknowledged. Valkyrie had been remembered. And for the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to feel the honor, the gratitude, and the weight of being seen. The salute would not last forever, but its impact, its perfect unspoken message, would remain etched in memory and spirit across the cabin, across the skis, across every life touched in that fleeting, transcendent moment. The Raptors remained in perfect formation, holding their wings steady as the airliner cruised through fading sunlight. Every subtle movement, every tilt of their wings, spoke volumes to Valkyrie, messages she understood without a single word. Her fingers traced the glass instinctively, as though she could bridge the distance between herself and the pilots soaring beside the plane. Her pulse quickened, not with fear, but with a long-forgotten exhilaration, the thrill of recognition from those who knew her true worth. Passengers pressed against windows, breath caught, capturing the moment on phones and cameras. Some whispered, others gasped aloud. Yet even in their awe, they couldn't grasp the depth of the tribute playing out before them. To them, it was spectacle. To her, it was acknowledgement, respect, gratitude rendered in precision and flight patterns only trained aviators could master. The captain's voice echoed through the cabin again, calm and deliberate. "Ladies and the pilots accompanying our aircraft are honoring a passenger aboard today. Please observe respectfully." She drew a deep breath, letting it fill her lungs, steadying herself. Years of discipline, of commanding missions where hesitation could cost lives, now guided her actions. She would not falter, would not diminish the moment with uncertainty. Her eyes met the horizon, the airspace around the airliner, and for the first time in years she allowed herself to respond, not verbally but with presence. Her posture straightened, her gaze unwavering. Valkyrie acknowledged them. Across the cabin, the teenager's voice broke the silence. "Mom, I knew it. It's really her, Valkyrie, the fighter pilot." His words spread like wildfire. Whispers grew into chatter, heads turned, eyes widening. People began connecting the dots, the legendary call sign, the synchronized Raptor formation, the precision of the salute. What had begun as a spectacle for a few observant passengers now rippled through the cabin. The ordinary flight had transformed into history unfolding in real time. She allowed herself a fleeting glance at the businessman beside her. His eyes were wide with disbelief, his usual arrogance replaced by respect tinged with awe. He muttered something under his breath, but she didn't need to hear it. The meaning was clear: recognition. The silent acknowledgement that she was no longer just another traveler, that she had carried something extraordinary into this ordinary world, and now it could not be ignored. The Raptors dipped in unison again, closer this time, as if drawing her into a private moment of understanding. Valkyrie mirrored the gesture subtly, pressing her hand to the window with calm precision, shoulders squared. She wasn't performing. She wasn't seeking applause. She was participating in a language only the sky, the pilots, and she herself could fully comprehend. The salute was no longer one-sided. Her thoughts flashed briefly to the squadron she had once led, comrades lost in missions that had haunted quiet nights. Their memories surged in the back of her mind, reminding her that recognition was never just about herself. It was about honor, legacy, and continuity. Every careful maneuver, every precise wing dip, every unspoken motion from the pilots outside carried that understanding. Passengers were now fully absorbed. Phones recorded, videos streamed live, but even the recording could not capture the weight of the moment. A soft hush fell over the cabin as the Raptors held formation a moment longer, engines humming in perfect harmony. The sky had become a stage, and Valkyrie, though seated quietly among strangers, was at its center. She allowed herself a small, private nod, a subtle acknowledgement returned to the pilots. It was brief, almost imperceptible, but in the silent language of air combat it spoke louder than any words could. She was present. She was recognized. She was Valkyrie, not just a name, but a living testament to courage, precision, and sacrifice. Time seemed to stretch, suspended in the perfect moment. The Raptors maintained formation, the salute unbroken. In that instant, the cabin, the sky, and Valkyrie herself existed in a rare alignment of awe, respect, and human connection. The legend had returned not to announce herself, but to be silently, profoundly acknowledged. The sun had begun its slow descent, casting long golden streaks across the tarmac as the two F-22 Raptors finally peeled away from the airliner. Their engines, once a low hum synchronized with the plane, now roared briefly before fading into the distance, leaving only the faint vibration in the sky. The salute was complete, precise, flawless, and yet its weight lingered, pressing subtly on the passengers and Valkyrie alike. Inside the cabin, a ripple of applause spread, tentative at first, then growing louder as disbelief gave way to understanding. People rose to their feet, some clapping, others standing silently in awe. They didn't fully comprehend the magnitude of what they had witnessed, two elite fighter jets executing a perfect tribute, but they felt its power nonetheless. Phones flashed, cameras clicked, yet none could truly capture the gravity of the moment. Valkyrie remained seated, her back straight, fingers lightly resting against the window. She allowed the applause to wash over her without turning her head, letting it be absorbed rather than performed for. Years of anonymity had taught her restraint, the subtle power of presence over demonstration. This was not for them. It was for her. The pilots above had chosen to honor her, and she had chosen to receive that recognition quietly, without fanfare, without theatrics. She thought briefly of her squadron, the ones who had flown beside her in missions long classified, their faces flashing in her mind. Many were gone now, memories etched into her mind as sharply as radar lines in the night sky. This salute was not just for her, it was for them too. For the lives saved, the dangers endured, and the sacrifices made in silence. The Raptors had conveyed a message across miles of airspace and decades of service. We remember. We honor. You are not forgotten. Passengers craned their necks again as the airliner descended toward the runway. The teenager near the window whispered loudly, "Mom, she really is Valkyrie. She saved lives. She's a legend." His mother nodded, eyes wide, holding her child tightly. Even the businessman beside Valkyrie, usually focused on stock reports and meetings, was silent, absorbed in the quiet reverence of the moment. Some whispered prayers, others simply stared, overwhelmed by the extraordinary unfolding before them. As the plane touched down, the landing smooth and precise, the energy in the cabin shifted. The applause softened, replaced by quiet murmurs of awe. Flight attendants moved efficiently, yet even they stole glances, recognizing, perhaps instinctively, that something remarkable had just occurred. Valkyrie adjusted her backpack, moving as if to stand, shoulders squared, posture reflecting calm authority. She had always carried herself with poise, whether in battle or in civilian life, and this moment demanded no less. The door opened at the gate and passengers began to disembark. Cameras still in hand, they whispered to each other, reliving what they had seen. Some approached Valkyrie hesitant, offering words of admiration and gratitude, but she only nodded subtly, polite yet reserved. Recognition had a place, but she had long learned to accept it quietly. Legends do not seek applause, they let it arrive on its own and then vanish. Outside, the fading sunlight glinted off the tarmac. A young F-22 pilot removed his helmet, exhaling deeply. He had saluted her, and now, having witnessed her presence firsthand, he felt a reverence that words could never capture. "I just flew beside Valkyrie," he whispered to his wingman, awe in his voice. He understood the significance. He had seen precision, courage, and humility embodied in a single figure. Valkyrie stepped carefully onto the jet bridge, each step deliberate, measured, quiet. She walked through the terminal as if part of the ordinary crowd once more. Yet she was not ordinary. She carried the weight of history, the acknowledgement of legends, and the quiet satisfaction of having been seen and honored. Around her, passengers moved past, some staring in disbelief, others whispering her name in hushed reverence. She paused briefly, allowing herself a private moment of satisfaction, then disappeared into the stream of travelers. A legend had returned, acknowledged in silence and precision. And though she would vanish from sight, the memory of the moment, the salute, the recognition, the awe, would remain with every passenger, every pilot, and every witness who had glimpsed Valkyrie for what she truly was. Legends, she knew, never truly fade.